Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Anticast. We are joined today by Kimber Amos from Red Siege, and we're going to be doing some fun. What would you call it? We were joking about it earlier, um, with I think the description you're saying where I think I talk crap about like GRC, but more auditing, right?
Uh,
We're going to
Everyone's
be doing some fun
favorite.
auditing things today with you. So.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Super fun.
We're super excited to have you here with us and sharing your knowledge with us. I'm going to go ahead and head to the backstage, and I'll come back when you're about finished, and we'll do some Q&A. So if y'all have questions, go ahead and queue those up for us, and we'll ask Kimber when we get back. So I'll head back. Good luck and have fun.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am going to share my screen with you. How would that be? I worked really hard on these slides, so I should show them to you. Um, all right. So welcome to my anti-siphon training today. Close security gaps, pass audits, stay secure. I am Kimber Amos, and let's get started. I had to hide Discord just so y'all know because you're very distracting. All right. So who am I? I'm not gonna to read my slide to you here, but I do have 20 years of experience. No, that is not an exaggeration. I was recruited by Apple in 2005, so I actually did in October. I'm hitting my 20 years in IT. I am a principal consultant, a security engineer. I've got experience with detection and response, Purple Bloom team. I have done IT work, yes. Team sysadmin, yes. Solaris 9, that'll date me. And security expertise. What you don't see here is GRC, because I am not a GRC person. I understand GRC. I spent in total about 10 years in the federal government. So I'm certainly very familiar with compliance, governance, and audits. So that's how we got here. So I'm approaching this training for you today from the perspective of a security professional, not a GRC professional. So I hope that's cool and we can just talk through it. I am leaving time at the end for questions as well. I've got some certs and I do some other stuff. I'm in a couple Tribar hacker books. So you can look those up. One is the security leaders and the other one's just the very first best hackers in the world one. I'm not one of the best hackers in the world, but I'm in the book. I have a sailboat. I am a terrible sailor, really bad, but I can fix the onboard diesel engine so I can get around. You can find me as Ms. Bat on every platform, pretty much. Like even my LinkedIn is Ms. Bat in the URL. So you can get a hold of me if you want to, especially if you need help with that abstract. All right. So today we're going to talk about security posture and getting audit ready. We're looking at more as a sort of a pre-flight thing. So the topics we're going to cover: the assets analysis, roadmaps, and then briefly I will scare you with audit statistics. So I did feel it was pertinent to put this here since I am not a GRC, but I'm also like very meticulous about how I want to present information and make sure that you understand what I'm not going to present. So this is not by any stretch of the imagination a complete guide for assessing your organization's security posture. I picked 3 things. In total, there are probably 25 things I could have talked about. So I'm just going to pick the top 3, maybe the lowest hanging fruit to get ready for an audit. But more than that, even if you're not going through an audit, just to kind of get your organization in a little bit better shape from an overall security posture perspective. So this is not a guide for an audit. None of this talk is going to be technical. We're not going to talk about scanning, pen testing, critical controls. However, you met some great people in the pre-show banter who are working with companies capable of doing all that with you and your organization. And then this is not going to be a replacement for a security posture review, the steps in this training. You really should consult with an experienced security firm before you tackle your compliance audit. So I didn't want to read the slide, but then I did. So there you go. All right. So security posture. I want to avoid assuming that everybody who's in the viewership right now knows what I'm talking about, because some of you may be joining us as folks who haven't heard this term. So that is why I'm defining it for you. So if we're talking about security posture, we're really talking about that 10,000-foot view, holistically looking at the entire sort of threat landscape, all of your assets, how you're able to handle response, what your policies look like. We're really going a little bit beyond, maybe a lot beyond the pen test here. So the pen test, let's just say as a thing I pick out of the sky to talk about. So you do a pen test and it gives you a lot of really good information about specific systems and maybe controls you need to fix, gaps you have. That's great for that system. But if you think about your own organizations where you work, or if you're in school, your university's IT system, you'll really kind of get this broader idea of everything out there. So maybe you did a pen test of the internet facing part of your organization's application. Cool. What about the back end though? What about the cloud infrastructure? What about if you're hybrid? What about your on-prem security posture? Even things like physical security fall under security posture. So it's a pretty overarching term, I guess, for all these things that kind of fit in. When we talk about audits, and I put most in parentheses because I don't know, sometimes I think audits are just for audit's sake to check a box. I'm not down on them, but the purpose of most of them is to kind of help you measure and improve your overall security posture. It's not just busy work. So if you want to get SOC 2 compliance, for example, like that's not just busy work. If you go through that process, your organization is going to have a more robust security posture when you're done. So audits can be really good things as long as you're prepared for them and you get through them and get your certification. What I have here in this last bullet is that what you don't want is for an auditor to come in or the audit team to come in, and that's really the first time you've gotten an overview of your security posture when you get the list of findings. That's kind of a waste of your time, a waste of the auditor's time, and it's going to kind of make everything an emergency that might not have been an emergency before if you'd done an evaluation of your posture before you started that process. So that's why I have here, maybe let's take a look at security posture before you dive into your compliance audit. All right, so we're going to talk about assets. Of all the posture reviews I've done, or all the I'm sure the pen tests that a lot of folks watching now have done, and I know folks at Red Siege have done, assets kind of become this, we'll just call it like the flagship of danger within the organization. So when you look at your organization's overall security posture, the largest chunk of that is going to be rooted in your assets. When we were doing sysadmin work, IT work, and maybe some of you still are now, I was going to say back in the day, but they're IT people now. You think asset and you think about that little barcode tag on the bottom of the laptop, and that's an asset, or the asset tag on the laptop, and that's the asset. But that's just not the case anymore. We've got IP, right? We've got hybrid infrastructures. Your entire infrastructure that's out there on AWS isn't tagged with an asset tag, but those S3 buckets are assets. The IP is an asset. If you're in the AI world, your LLM models, those are assets. Like that's your IP. So I wanted to just sort of start this by explaining that when we use the term asset, we all collectively need to start thinking of that as this big, broad much broader than that tag on the laptop anymore. So bigger headaches, bigger attack surface, more complicated security for sure. But there you go. If you learn nothing else from me today, you have just learned that an asset does not just mean a computer. All right. So to understand our security posture, we do have to understand what our assets are. So that's why I just sort of fell into that space to make sure we're really clear and we're using the same language here, and we're all understanding the terminology. So even the best security teams are going to struggle with visibility of their assets. I found this little statistical bar graph, and like, I think Abraham Lincoln said that like 92.3% of all percentages are just made up. So we'll just go with that. But this one did seem legit. So when a medium to mid to large size organization did scans, reports, and sort of audit information was gathered by one of these security groups that loves to collect statistics, they found that 27% of databases were missing from the asset list, 17% of devices were missing, 16% of IoT devices were missing. And really kind of mind-blowing is that 14% of identities, people management, account management, those kind of things were missing from their overall asset lists. So that's kind of wild. Take that information as you will. Go back to your organization and look at those inventory lists and just see if you can think of one single thing that exists in your environment that isn't on that inventory list. And I bet you can come up with one, which means that maybe you fall in these percentages. I don't know. Maybe your company is 100% secure and you're totally awesome. And kudos to you if that's the case. All right. So when we think about all these assets and how we find them, so we think about, as system administrators would, or our folks in the IT department who have the most thankless jobs on the planet. So thank you for doing that job, folks. They have things like MDM and these asset inventory collection tools and ways to push out patching and ways to manage all these systems. Those only work though for the assets that we know about. So they only work for the assets that have been entered into the system. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is like your IT inventory list may not and probably is not comprehensive of all the assets in your organization's landscape. So I put a list of things here, and just in case we have some folks who can't see the slides for whatever reason, we'll just jam through them. But if you want to do like a rapid asset discovery, it's not really rapid, that's sort of a misnomer, but it's going to be a lot easier than, say, going to ask everyone what they know about, right? So that's what I mean when I say rapid. It's just kind of taking the people part out of it. So our device agent discovery tools, we know about those. But do we also know like we should be using network scanners and agents to kind of see what's out there on our network? And hey, is that one of our things? Does that belong to us? Do we know who that user is who's connected right now? Like, let's kind of tear that apart and make sure that we know. So active internal scanning, the SNMP, WMI if you've got a Windows environment. I really like the idea of public data scraping for this cloud-based and internet-facing assets. That's kind of a good way to see if you've got something out there you might not know about. Just look for it the same way a threat actor would. Threat intel feeds and platforms are really good ways to kind of spot your own assets. You don't want to necessarily learn about having an asset from one of those, but if you do, I mean, at least you found it. Cloud provider APIs, there's just all kinds of ways to like go through APIs and figure out what's out there and do a search for your stuff. Domain scans, that's a pretty straightforward one. Public code repo scans. I kind of like that because you can scan like GitHub, GitLab, those public code repositories, and a lot of times find like system names or organizational references, and might be a good way to know if you've got I don't even want to say rogue, like maybe you have a developer who spun up some sort of compute instance and then is pushing code, public code to it. But if it's following like your naming convention, you'll find it in the public repo scan, but then you'll learn about an asset you may not have known you had. So there are lots of different ways. I'm sure there are more, but these are kind of the ones that come to mind as something that folks interested particularly in this type of information might already know how to do, or may have learned something new. Let's cross our fingers on that one. All right, so let's say you go through all that stuff, fantastic, and you've created like what you believe is a 95% comprehensive inventory list of all of your assets across your landscape. The biggest issue that I've seen, or the most frustrating issue I've seen as someone in security, is working with the security team to do that asset inventory grab. That's some hands on deck to do the things I just listed on the prior slide, to kind of track down all of your inventory. And then to find out 6-8 months later that the list isn't up to date anymore, because now folks are reaching out to the security team again, because worst case scenario, you've had a compromise of a machine, a system, a model, a user that you didn't know about because they weren't like captured in your inventory list. So I had hoped to do this in a way that like those words spelled something, but they don't. So it's kaya pava. I don't know. Like I did my best. Look, but I won't necessarily read this to you. But consolidating your assets into like a centralized location, that's great. A platform, dashboard, whatever works. Automation for the automated scans, continuously updating things, detecting unauthorized devices, right? Integrating your SIM solution, vuln management solution, giving yourself this sort of holistic view of assets, because if you're doing some continuous scanning, you're picking up on assets maybe that are joining that you didn't necessarily know should be in your inventory yet. One of the things that's kind of crucial about asset inventory, and for those of you who are in IT, you already know this, so you can just, twiddle your thumbs, sip your coffee. But the prioritization of assets is a super important and kind of overlooked part of this process. But you identify everything, but there should be some way in your inventory that you've denoted which high value or critical assets are out there, so that you can prioritize those vulnerability remediations first, understanding which systems are business critical. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so making sure that these assets are actually prioritized. And then, validation is going to be the last step for pretty much any process we ever talk about in security, right? So I don't need to really explain that to you, but validating the accuracy of your asset information is good. And if you find something that works for you, you may not need to do all the things on that other list to find all your assets. Maybe 2 of those things actually give you everything you need. Then, use those for your validation. All right. I know I'm talking a little fast. I'm gonna take a breath so everybody understands how important asset inventory is to collect, how important it is to maintain, and everybody learned today what I mean when I say asset. And that's a little different than what I meant when I said asset 10 years ago, even. All right. So we have now our 98% accurate asset inventory. We are doing scans. We know what's out there. We're super excited. We think like, okay, when it's time for an audit, we've got our list of things that the auditor is going to check, and it's going to be great. But first, before we do that, we should probably do just a little bit of threat analysis. So what's a threat analysis? Well, we're going to identify, assess, and evaluate our security risks and threats to our systems, assets, networks, right? But I kind of, in this other bullet, and you know what, if there are any threat analysts on this call who don't agree with me, then that's totally fine, because I can't see you or hear you anyway. So we'll just pretend I'm right. But I like to think of threat analysis the same way that I think of asset discovery, and approach them in the same way. So the tools and tricks we use to identify all of our assets, let's think of it in that systematic way that we can use tools and assets and tips and tricks to identify risks and threats to those assets. So I love Pokemon. There you go. But hopefully that connection makes sense for you. You've got an inventory of assets. Now let's get an inventory of threats. Like, that's kind of how we can think about that. So when we identify these threats to our, what is now a giant asset list, we're going to have to identify weaknesses before attackers do. So this is where things like vuln scanning, pen tests, red team exercises for assumed breach, ransomware come into play. These are fantastic tools before you ever think about going into the audit space, to break down the threats to all of your assets, or the assets that you choose. Maybe you budgets are a thing. So maybe you can only choose to test your higher value targets. That's fine. Anything's better than an auditor finding things before you do. So that's where these other tools come into play. And you may have some of this stuff internally. If you've got large security teams, you may need to go external for this, but I highly recommend identifying these weaknesses and really focusing on maturing your security posture before you think about stepping into the audit space. I like the idea of leveraging threat intel. So threat intel feeds, industry reports, breaking news, wherever you get your security news from. I mean, you could spend the first 3 hours of your morning kind of going through everything that's happened around the world in cybersecurity. That won't probably make your boss too happy. So maybe pick and choose your threat intel feeds wisely. And for accuracy, you'll find your things. I'm sure that everyone's got your spaces that you like to check to see kind of what's going on, what happened while you were sleeping. If you have those, like, you totally drop them in the Discord, share that knowledge with your fellow security folks, because maybe you'll all figure out like new places to check for threat intel that you didn't know about before, or security news, or places that if you know of a place or two that you're not typically getting accurate information. I'm not going to tell you to share that in a public Discord, but y'all are free to do what you'd like to do with that information. But it's good to know the places where the threat intel feed isn't, as accurate. And then, like we discussed with the assets, classifying and prioritizing vulnerabilities and risks. So this is where this ties into our assets. We have to assess the business impact of our security risks and incidents, and prioritize business critical systems. We can't really do that unless we've already prioritized our business systems. So I did put a little asterisk here for you might need to do a cost benefit analysis. I am not a CFO. I can tell you which machines or which assets or which systems or which buckets or which networks that, if they go down, would cause an existential crisis for our business. And that might be enough. Just having that information is great. If you need to do a cost benefit analysis, then you kind of probably have to partner up with folks within your organization to calculate the devastating financial loss of ransomware attack to that system, or a breach of that system and exfiltration of data from that system. But this is the part where you would seek like executive buy-in to maybe do a little extra work on your security team. If you can prepare this cost benefit analysis, find time to have that done before you need it in the event of a security breach, emergency, ransomware attack, etc. It's a really good thing to be able to take over to your leadership and stakeholders to say, hey, as part of this like threat analysis thing we were doing to get ready for an audit, we actually figured out that if we lose this one system in an attack, it's going to cost our organization, $10 million. You'll probably be able to ask for an increase in your security budget if that is truly the case with that system. So, yeah, familiarize yourself with the cost benefit analysis, at least know what your business critical systems are, at least just be able to say these systems will definitely give us a really bad day, either with our finances or in the press or our employees or just the existence of our business. If we lose them, make sure those are very clearly marked on inventory lists that are held very privately, securely. I didn't mention that earlier, but I do not want to make the assumption that you all know, but your asset inventory list is, that should be considered like private business, critical, secure information that is in kind of a need to know basis. Okay, great. So we've analyzed our threats. So now we have to protect our assets. So, yep, update your asset inventory. How many times have I said that now? I thought when I did these slides that this would be at least the third time I've said it, but I think we're probably up to 5. And I'll just kind of, harp on it a little bit, but your asset inventory is critical to understanding and analyzing your attack surface. If you don't know what you have, you cannot protect it. You might get lucky, but I don't like to count too much on luck in security. Even though a lot of red teamers get lucky a lot, blue teamers not so much, right? So practicing good cyber hygiene, so I just really hate that phrase, and it sounds really funny to me because I just think of teeth brushing. But anyway, that's the standard, that's the term, cyber hygiene. So we're all gonna have that along with good personal hygiene, hopefully. So some of the things that are listed under cyber hygiene there are strong passwords with policies, automated patching, data encryption, strong access control, lock down those accounts, principle of least privilege, all those things that we know, but that aren't always easy, like automated patching. Any of my folks listening have legacy systems? Probably. Legacy on-prem systems? Probably. Automated patching gonna break something? Probably. So I am not someone who's gonna talk down to everyone and say you should have patched. I worked within the federal government for nearly 10 years, and I know full well that patching systems sometimes can, I don't know, make you disconnect from something in space that you can never connect to again since the space shuttle program is decommissioned. Listen, it's a whole thing. Just trust me. I get it. You can't always do automated patching, but where feasible, where you're able, where budget allows, where systems allow, just as much as you can. The goal should be, 95%. 100 would be nice, but if you've got legacy systems, that's not realistic. So let's be realistic. Maintaining solid documentation, everyone's favorite. We were just talking about this in the pre-show banter a little bit about report writing. And sometimes writing that report can, I'm not even gonna say sometimes, that report's gonna take longer to write than the hack took, or the defense took, or the update took, or whatever, right? But anyway, solid documentation, it's necessary. We've got to do it. We're all going to do it. We're going to learn to love it. But we want to make sure that we've got solid documentation. So we'll start with security policies. So, yep, that's your access control, your network configuration. Make sure you're including your, rules on segregation, data security. That there's so many tiers to that with data classification, data storage, encryption, but that's what the et cetera is, right? But those policies, we really want to make sure that we've got good documentation on that, because I can tell you that it's not enough to be secure. Like, auditors are going to want to see your policies, and then they're going to, in some cases, validate that those policies are in place. So plans, yep, those are documentation as well. Incident response plans, business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans. The number of organizations that don't actually have formal plans for one or all of these things is kind of astounding. They may have a list of what to do if an alert goes off. They may not. One of the things that I've been surprised to see doing posture reviews are missing just even phone trees, like who owns what and how do we get a hold of them. That all kind of falls under your incident response plan, which will feed into those other two, your BCP and your DR plans. But check today. Look at your org's IR plan, look at your team's IR plan. If you've got multiple plans, just pick the one that you'd be most likely to have to use on your team. And just look at the last time it was updated. Last time you've tried a tabletop with it, last time you've tested it, last time those backups have been tested, so that we can put that, in a little appendix in our disaster recovery plan or our BCP. These things are important. Documentation is important, but process is important. These things have to go hand in hand. So test the backup and then document that you tested the backup, if that, hopefully that makes sense. The assigned roles and responsibilities, the clearer the better. This is like actually kind of a big ball that gets dropped, because you get a little comfortable in your roles, you get a little comfortable with your team, everybody that you work with, and you're like, oh, well, if that breaks, we'll just call Susan, okay, what if Susan's out on parental leave? Do we know who else to call? Do we have roles and responsibilities assigned for each of these systems or segments of the network or whatever? So the clearer the better. I like a very clearly defined roles and responsibilities document, and that ideally would just be right there in the incident response plan, like chapter 1. So if go check and see if you have that too, and if you do, check and see the last time it's updated. The best way to do that is just to look and see if anybody on the assigned roles and responsibilities list or in the phone tree is no longer working at your company, and that'll give you a good indication of how often that's updated. All right, so I said at the beginning I would talk a little bit about remediation planning, roadmap planning. Okay, I just want you all to know, this is not a humble brag. I have a Master of Fine Arts degree, and this is the best piece of artwork that I've ever drawn in my whole life. And I just hope that you all appreciate that I kind of threw in a little cactus subtext there to prepare for Wild West Hacking Fest. Anyway, there you go. So don't panic. Let's say you found some threats, you found some vulns, there's some things that need to be remediated. You've done these scans, and through the process of discovering assets and then taking that asset information and doing vulnerability scanning, you've found like piles of things that need to be fixed. But unfortunately, your security roadmap for the next 18 months is already done, and your product manager is super happy working on totally other projects. Okay, don't panic. But we need to talk about having an iterative security roadmap. So If those of you have come from the dev world, like, we always say iterate, 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 right? Like it's part of just agile development. If you're waterfall, that's cool too. I, I'm not. But iterative security roadmap. Now, does this mean that we can throw a wrench into a very well thought out plan, budget minded business need roadmap that our product manager has thoughtfully developed and worked with the security team to refine? Like, we can't throw that out the window. Okay, so we as security people have to take a beat, and we need to look at all the risks and threats we just found, 4 slides ago. The first thing we're checking for, though, is existing compromise. That is going to be number one. That's to stop the presses. Sorry about your roadmap. Like, this team's got to be pulled. It's just the way it is, an existing compromise. And that's going to be part of your incident response plan too. It shouldn't throw your roadmap off too much. But on smaller teams where the folks assigned to IR may also be the second folks assigned to like development, it could throw off the roadmap. But existing compromise, that's it. We got to stop the presses. I like to look at risk scores. Now, you don't have to necessarily use some sort of standardized risk score model. Like you could, but here's the thing. Like, how many times have you run like a Cyclone DX scan and had it come back with, 15 critical vulnerabilities? But then you work with your engineers and look, and actually you're not even vulnerable, and none of those are really applicable to you. Maybe one of them you need to fix. The other one's like, there won't fix because you're not vulnerable to them. So sometimes like more formal models for risk scores may not necessarily be from a prioritization perspective, the priority that you need to tackle these incidents, events, whatever. But I like the idea of scoring things in some kind of way that makes sense for you and your team. And then risk and threats, prioritize emerging threats. So remember a couple slides ago when we were looking at the news, we're reading security news, we're looking at threat intel feeds, we're looking at recent compromises, we're watching, breaking news wherever, to see that like, this might be a problem. And actually our LLMs would be susceptible to that sort of attack. So we've got to add that somewhere into our prioritization for updating our security roadmap. So that's why I say we're going to integrate this threat analysis into our roadmap planning when possible. We can't predict the future as much as we'd like to, but looking at emerging threats, looking at not just our own existing compromises, but compromises that we're hearing about in the media, or that folks are giving talks about, or that in really best case scenarios, we've got organizations coming right out and saying, hey, we were compromised. Here's what we did to remediate. So, that all kind of rolls into threat analysis. And it'd be great if our roadmap never had to change, but threats change. So sometimes our roadmap has to. It's a good idea to have a standard remediation process that would include your mitigation with a target time date. Why do you want this? Because your PM needs it from you. They just need to know, like, okay, all threats are not equal, all risks are not equal, all attacks are not equal. Certainly ransomware is like a entirely different beast in itself. So we're not going to tackle that right now because this is short training. But if we have an idea of kind of what our standard remediation process looks like, our run book for, let's just say like a run-of-the-mill high vulnerability or critical vulnerability even, and what our SLAs are, so that we can communicate that with our PM so that they understand what we're talking about when we say, hey, we need to carve out a little piece of the next sprint. Let's not just say, oh gosh, I need all the devs and it's all hands on deck and we've got to do this with like no real plan. This is why IR runbooks are super important. And tabletop exercises can kind of help you nail down those time to fix things if you do some real world scenarios. And so so let's say we kind of get that nailed down, then let's refine it. So the more times we kind of use that process, the better we're going to get at it to improve these benchmarks. Because I know that it's not, SLAs aren't always like super fun to think about, or all the other acronyms, right? Like OKRs or whatever, right? But we all work for businesses, and our businesses do use benchmarks to kind of understand what kind of progress we're making. And it looks great for security teams, especially if they want to ask for bigger budgets. If they're showing that like, hey, we're doing this, we're refining this process, we're working through, we've managed to save, this much money because we avoided a compromise. Great. But we need more money so that we can add, say, this, tool to our toolkit. Great. Benchmarks will help. Improving your benchmarks help. And then, yep, you've got to prepare to advocate for out-of-band patching, bug squashes, roadmap detours. You don't do this by brute force, unfortunately. And I know like a lot of red teamers, it just comes naturally to brute force everything. But when we're talking about an entire business plan and a roadmap, that's been thoughtfully assembled based on business needs and all the other things that we've discussed, resources, etc. We can't just storm into the PM's office and demand devs and demand time. We have to learn to just advocate. So maybe that looks like a compromise that every second sprint, I don't know, you've got a bug squash day, or if we've got the existing compromise, that's where we talk about out-of-band patching, but we have a plan, a process in place, even for emergencies, to execute on that. The roadmap detours would come into play if, say, we're going to need to do a migration from AWS commercial to GovCloud now, because now the business need is, FIPS compliance, whatever, right? I make that sound like it's not a huge deal. That's actually a huge deal to do that kind of migration. So it actually would require probably not just a roadmap detour, but in a lot of cases, a roadmap rewrite. So that's what I have. When all else fails, send your PM baked goods and ask them how you can work better with them to understand the limitations of the security roadmap, timelines, sprints, and where there's wiggle room. And it's best if you can find a way to get some of this out-of-band patching, bug squash, emerging threat space in sprints here and there before it's an emergency that you need them, then that'd be fantastic. I'm a big fan of cross-functional teams, and product managers are your friends. They are there to help the business be successful. They are not there to stop you from meeting your security goals. All right. So what got you here? Yay. You're secure. You got the trophy. Woohoo. Won't get you there. So that's a successful audit. So I probably don't need to tell too many folks here that security does not always equal compliance. So a secure environment doesn't automatically mean you'll pass an audit. And there are any number of reasons that is. I've talked about a lot of them: documentation, validation, asset inventory, risks, threats, existing compromises. All these things go into play. And again, these are just like 3 small things. When I do a security posture review, I think at last count, I had like 24 sort of domain areas to dive into. Today, I'm talking to you about 3 of them. So even doing everything I've said today, that's a fantastic start, and it's going to put you way ahead of the game, but it's not going to get you through an audit. Like there's still work to do. There's also a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. If you like book recommendations, it's not a bad one. So audit preparation, this is just where I wanted to kind of tell you how complex it is. So again, I teeter between wanting to not read slides, but also understanding some folks may not be able to see the slides. So well, I'll just jam through this really quickly, but let's say you need to just implement the CIS controls at your work. That's 18 controls, which sounds small, but it's over 150 safeguards. 27,001, 93 controls with 4 different themes. SOC 2, 60 to 100 controls based on the 5 TSCs. NIST 800-171 is 110 controls and 14 different control families. PCI is a whole other mess with 240 controls because money stuff, right? CMMC, this is like going to be in one of those, that federal DoD space. We'll just say lots of controls, but 853, NIST 853, over 1,000 controls now. When I joined the federal government, we thought we were going to kind of, I don't know, collapse into a state of eternal sleep when there were 285 controls, and now 853 has grown to 1,000 controls. So good luck with that. And NIST 853, though, is not just for government anymore, because a lot of larger companies, organizations, even smaller ones, have decided to start using 853 as a standard. So good luck to that if you're on the team that has to prepare for those controls. So are you ready for an audit? I don't know. That's why I have trust but verify. You could trust that you are, but I would definitely recommend doing some sort of pre-flight checklist, working with a company that can do a posture review or advise your organization on improving your security posture before you go down the road of an audit. Some of it is because you'll save yourself some time, energy, tears if you can fix a lot of this stuff before it gets, I don't know, we'll say tested, before you get tested on it. There's a financial consideration there. Audits are not free. So depending on which audit you want, and we didn't even talk about FedRAMP, but that starts somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. You want to do as much as you can to prepare for that before you actually get those folks in there diving into your systems and reviewing your stuff, because time is money. And for the FedRAMP team who comes in, like, your bill is going to go up exponentially as the time that it takes to get you through the audit goes up, or the certification process. So I have a cartoon here. It's adorable. And David Fletcher makes really cool nerd cartoons, so you should go check them out. And I think that that's about it. I know I talked really fast trying to squeeze a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I will open it up for questions if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimber. Appreciate it. It's fantastic. There's a couple questions from the Zoom that I can go over with you.
Okay.
This one's from Christian. From a cybersecurity point of view, which audit framework gives the best security posture?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think the answer is it depends on what kind of business that you're in. So if you're in healthcare, you've got, HIPAA compliance, right? So if you're in financial, you want to probably hit PCI. I think fundamentally where I see a lot of places start, which is good, is just the ISO 27001. Like, that's a great start. And it's got most of the controls and areas that you would need to, if you can manage to get through that, I think that's a great start. But again, I'm going to stick with my answer. It depends on your business and what you've got, what your IP is, what your crown jewels are. what your business model is, or your product or your service, those kind of things. But 27,001's never a bad place to start.
Thank you. And hey, Jaycon, I'm glad I get to see you next week. Scott's asking, any thoughts on how to ensure documentation is reviewed and updated?
You tell me and we'll all know. I mean, we can do regular reviews, right? But like I said, how many times have we looked at the phone tree and it's somebody who doesn't work there anymore? So I'm trying to look for exactly that. Oh, okay. So I mean, I guess you could add it to your workflow. It's tough if you're, I mean, it's not always practical or feasible to update in the moment. Like, let's just use the example of a terminated employee or an employee who's separated from the company. It's not always that moment that you go and remove them from the phone tree. But I think, you know, if you could get into your process workflow an update of documentation. I know that's not like super helpful, but if you can kind of codify it, I think that's maybe the best way to approach it. Some of this stuff should happen with, say, your onboarding and offboarding processes. But again, that doesn't always trickle into things like the incident response plan or the business continuity plan. So I like to say, make sure that at least the folks and the roles and responsibilities are updated, you know, regularly with the onboarding offboarding process. If you need to audit that occasionally, you should. I think like the best folks to do that are going to be the security team leads. Like, you want to make sure that you've got the right folks getting the right phone calls when there's an incident. Or maybe you're, you know, if you've got a person who's in charge of IR, making sure that that's all kept up to date. But if you can kind of keep that in a centralized document that then links from the BCP and the business continuity, with the business continuity plan, the DR plan, and the IR plan, so you're not trying to update in 14 different places. As much as you can centralize that, that's good too. But yeah, I put it in your workflow, codify it if you have to. Onboarding, offboarding, we see a lot of missed things across the board with those, including, I see there's a question about identities. You know,
One
folks
from
not
Rob.
having permissions removed or being removed, or, you know, it's, you know, double check your onboarding, offboarding documentation. But if it's cool with you, I will touch on this identities piece, like how is an identity an asset? So we're talking about anything that is value to your company. And if you've got, say, a root AWS account, that is valuable property, depending on like who could get a hold of it. If you're not tracking, and I'll just pick on that for a minute as a good example for an asset, root accounts. Okay, so I have actually been in the situation where we lost access to all of our administrator accounts in our AWS infrastructure because of one malformed Terraform stanza. The only way to so everybody who was an admin was wiped, including the person who had locked down the credentials for the root account. So then you're trying to recover that. Now imagine if that had been an attacker that did that instead of what we called for 2 weeks, totally poked fun and called him the biggest insider threat we ever had. But imagine if it had been something like that. If you hold the root keys for, say, the AWS account that stores the S3 buckets for your LLMs valued at $10 million, $100 million, those identities are worth money. So we do want to look at them as an asset that needs to be protected, an asset that needs to be controlled, that access needs to be controlled too, that we understand how to manage them securely. We're not going to just put those on like an Excel spreadsheet and keep them on somebody's desktop, right? So, so when I say like asset, that's as in like think outside of the box, right? Think outside of like the computer box, but anything that could be worth value to an attacker or to an insider threat. But I'm one of those people who thinks that 95% of things are insider things are not intentional. But we really want to make sure that we're securing those things in the same way that we would secure someone's laptop, if that makes sense. I'm going to scroll back. So Tim Medine is even better looking. Okay, there we go. I'll leave the Hackett one for you.
There's one.
Favorite modern asset inventory tools. Please refrain from listing things like Excel. I actually bag on Excel all the time. I did that before I even realized that. Time and place and ones that keep themselves up to date. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to avoid recommending vendor tools. It's not, I prefer to stay agnostic, but we did talk about some processes and some things that you could do to keep to kind of search for inventory in your network. So I would suggest maybe just looking for tools that do some of those things that I listed on that slide about scanning for assets within your network, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, I don't have like a good answer for you, but I do want to be cautious about recommending specific tools. Tracking assets that are not machines. Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question, and it's going to boil down to the security team working together to really determine what your assets are. Some things like root account information for AWS or GCP, right? Those are not going to be something that you have in your asset inventory list. That might be something that links that you link from in a secure place to store. But as far as tracking those, I mean, again, it's going to be some of this, the assets that I'm thinking of now around cloud environments, EC2 instances, buckets, LLMs, the account that manages your like CoreWeave, core allocation, things like that. We collectively are all kind of beholden to developers who set those things up, letting us know. But tagging these assets like, gosh, so that sounds confusing. I don't mean like the asset tag on the bottom of the laptop, but like, so for example, AWS, you spin something up, you codify some rules around having each instance that's running or Lambda or whatever, but you tag them so that you're able to monitor like what's getting spun up. Jez Humble, also, if you like book recommendations, the DevOps Handbook, it's fantastic. Jez had a hand in writing that, but he wrote a little tool called Rajatiba, and it's named after an Indian goddess, I guess, of destruction. And so what it does, though, when you run it in your environment, is it goes out there and finds all your AWS instances that aren't tagged. And if they're not tagged, it burns them to the ground. So if you're looking for like ways to manage them, in more like destructively, you probably only ever have to run that once before devs learn that they need to use tagging. And then that gives you a much easier way to keep an eye on what's out there in your network and in your infra. Is there, I think we're at time, but is there anything else, Zach?
If you want to keep answering questions, you're more than welcome to, but if you have to run to another meeting, that's totally okay too. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you outside of this?
Yeah, so I said earlier to Ms. Bat, MZBAT. That's going to be me on all the platforms. But LinkedIn probably is like the one we're mostly using now, I guess, for stuff like this. So feel free. I don't want to do that weird self promotion thing where like send me a like or subscribe. Like I don't need all that. But if but my DMs are open or whatever on LinkedIn, so you should be able to just message me. And then um yeah, you can just email Tim at Red Siege if
Yeah.
you have really hard questions, or Mike at Red Siege. But yeah, we're all around. We're pretty easy to find. I am on Blue Sky, but I mostly only post pictures of my cat and dog. But yeah, I mean, I think LinkedIn's kind of the place we're mostly connecting now. So feel free to tag me there or shoot me a DM, and I'm happy to respond.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Tim, thank you for being here too. Appreciate you, sir. We do have a survey for y'all to fill out for this webcast. So if you have time, please consider filling out the survey, which I'm going to put in the chat. John Strand would really love and appreciate you for taking your time and doing that.
Dude, feedback's
Um,
important. We love it. Trust
yeah,
me.
it is.
Hey,
It
I'll
helps.
say on behalf of John, we love to hear your feedback. I'll say we love to hear
I just,
feedback.
I just want the good feedback.
Yeah.
I want all, no, see, everyone wants the good feedback. I want the suggestions because good feedback is like, what do you do? Nothing.
I already know my suggestion. It's why does she talk so fast? Because I had 48 minutes,
I
folks.
didn't think you talked very fast.
Oh, you did great.
That's because you talk fast, Tim.
I do talk fast. Yes.
Yeah, I always ask for constructive feedback. That's like my first thing. Like, give me constructive feedback.
Yep.
Tell us how we can do better. Always. Like, give me the
Always,
negative stuff first. I don't ever want to hear positive.
Yeah, because
How
the
do we make
positive,
this
like,
better?
what do you do with it? You're like, okay, it's great, cool. How do we make it better?
Yeah,
for
always want to
sure.
make it better. Always want to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. This was super
Absolutely.
fun.
Absolutely. Love having you
Yeah,
guys
thanks,
here.
Kimber. Thanks, Zach.
And yeah, absolutely. We won't have a anti-cast next week or a webcast from Black Hills because we'll be live over at Wild West Hackin' Fest. So you can still sign up for virtual tickets for that. We will have live news next Wednesday, I believe. So you will, I think that'll be the only live thing that we put out there to the public. Uh, Deb wanted me to mention that our Spearfish General Store is now closed and it will be back open October 12th, I believe she said. So you will not be able to purchase anything from now until I think October 12th or whatever it was. So I'm sorry, but you guys can stay tuned with everything that we have going on here at Black Hills by going to poweredbybhs.com. It'll show you all the cool events that we have coming up every single week. And that's all we got for today's Anticast. Thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you, Red Siege, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And we will see y'all next week.
Yeah,
Peace
and stop by the Black Hills booth, the anti-siphon booth, the anti-stock booth, and of course the Red Siege booth. We're all gonna have tons of swag and stuff. So say hi to Zach
Yeah,
and myself and Mike.
yeah, we'll
Hey,
be
Zach,
there.
I did miss though. Somebody had asked if there were, even though Wild West Hacking Fest was sold out, were training tickets still available? And I'm not sure that
Virtual, yes.
okay,
Virtual training tickets are still available, but in-person training tickets are sold out as well.
there you
We
go,
are
folks.
yeah,
Virtual.
completely sold out for in-person for Deadwood, which is crazy and cool. Oh, I don't think we'll have that problem in Denver because we have plenty of space, but
Thanks.
you never know. Would love to sell out Denver as well. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, we'll see you all next week, and we'll see you in for another Anticast in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody, and have a good week. See y'all later.